What's up, family? We are back and closing out day 6. Today we visited Pergamum and Smyrna, two very different cities, but really, really, really cool cities. So we started with Pergamum, and kind of the theme for the day was restoring power. And we started there and started at the bottom of the city and kind of worked our way up and then back down. Actually, it was really, really neat. We started at a place called Asclepius, which was to a god named Asclepion, and so it was actually like a healing spa. People would travel from miles around to come to this place all over the country, come to this place because it had been, it was thought that you could be healed in this place by this one particular god. And so there was a whole bunch of things that you had to jump through hoops to actually get your person that you would bring there healed and all those kinds of things. So it was a really cool. We walked through this one tunnel where the priest of this particular god would whisper through the tunnels as people walked through them, on their way to the place where you're supposed to bring your sick ones. And they would whisper to kind of manipulate people into thinking that the gods were speaking to them and would tell them how to heal them and stuff like that. So it was a really, really interesting space for us to start. And so it kind of led into the whole theme of what is true power and how do we restore that power? What's power to us? What do we view as powerful, and how do we restore that? And then Tommy asked us this question. What was the question he kept asking us to look for? Because it's in the letter to Pergamum. He asked us, we're looking for the throne of Satan.
Sorry.
Yeah. Every place we were at, he's like, hey, I want you to try to figure out what's the throne of Satan. When in the letter to Pergamum, he says, you're in the midst of the throne of Satan. I see you, working against the throne of Satan. So we went to all these different locations, some temples, this particular healing spa. He's like, is this the throne of Satan? We go to the next one. He's like, is this the throne of Satan? There was the altar of Zeus. So is that the throne of Satan?
And we were in the stadium.
Yeah, the stadium. Is the stadium itself for everything
for
that they,
and things like that.
They put everything in there. Was that what Jesus is referencing as the throne of Satan? So kind of the whole, first half of the day was where's that place at? What Jesus is referencing in Revelations chapter 2 and 3. What is he talking about? So which I thought was really, really cool. We looked for it all over the place. We left the healing spa with the thought of that God is called Yahweh Rapha, which is the one true God of healing. And so I thought that was kind of a cool contrast to all of the hoops that they were jumping through to try to have this one particular God heal whatever their family member. And he asked us the question. He's like let's just take if your kid or your family member was sick, would you be willing to compromise? Because in order to get your person healed at this place, you had to worship their gods, you had to pay money into them, and you had to do a whole bunch of other things that would have compromised your faith as a believer. But it was said that it would heal your person. And so he just kind of asked the question, would you be willing to compromise if you knew that your sick loved one would be healed? Which was such a great question for us. And he says Satan always has lies of healing, but God is the one true God of healing, which I thought was really cool. Then we kind of made our way up to the top of the mountain at Pergamum, and we walked through so many great things where you really began to see. It was the first place where he said cult emperor worship really kind of started, right? Pergamum was a heavy Roman city that it once Alexander the Great got there and kind of made Pergamum what it was. And then as the Romans came in, I think it was Atlas III that willed it to Rome. And as Rome kind of put their imprint on that, this is where emperor cult worship really started, which just kind of feeds into everything that we've talked about all week. So anyway, what did you like about
quite
that?
a bit more historical context than I did.
Sorry. What was your big key takeaways?
I was just looking at my notes and I was like,
Jen's trying to move these things along a little bit faster. Sorry, guys.
She's very tired.
What were your big key takeaways?
I love it when you put me on the spot. So I think we kept looking for the throne of Satan, which I the whole time you knew it was a trick question. But I don't know. It's the same thing I keep saying every single time. But it's now you're reading it, and one of the things he says is these letters are written to real people in real places.
Mm,
And I think
yeah.
we read it, and a lot of times we skip Revelation because everyone talks about it
Like,
being
what does that
scary.
mean? Or you don't know what it means.
No
right?
idea.
Yeah.
But then, like, he tells you, like, hey, like, one of the things he says, like, there's social classes, and, like, later on we talk about, like, guilds and trades, and, like, this city's known for this kind of trade, and this city's known for this kind of immorality. So it's like, when you figure out, like, those towns, and Tommy keeps calling it boots on the ground, which is, like, my favorite term ever, you know, because I like to hike. But it's like, when you get there, and then, like, Ozan, our awesome tour guide, tells you about what those are, and then Tommy comes around and he's like, listen, like, they do this, this, and this here, and then you go and you flip through Revelation, you're like, oh, that's why he's talking about, like, here he talked about, like, hidden manna in this chapter or whatever.
Yeah, that was so good.
And, like, it's called the city of the sword, so he talks about the double-edged sword. So, like, we're literally teaching us why they're, again, I say this every single time we talk about this, I'm not as smart as you, but it keeps coming out over and over, like,
the context of what
I cannot, and context is my jam. Like, I love anything that's on context.
We keep talking about how Jesus knows his church intimately.
Yeah.
And so when he talks about, like, the sword, when Jesus references the sword, like, it's a direct reference to something that is going on in Pergamon, which we can talk about a little bit later. But, like, man, there's just everything that Jesus says to the churches is so appropriate and perfectly fit for what they're going through in that moment. And so it just kind of gives us courage that, like, gosh, he knows us so well, and when he's speaking to us through his word, like, it's exactly what we need in that moment. And I thought that's
the whole
awesome.
title was just like restoring power, because every day it's restoring something, and he just said, like, God's word is power. And so, like, we found out all of those little areas we visited were the throne of Satan. And he said our heart is the throne of Satan.
Yep.
And the only thing, even the last question, he always ends with a question, is like, and he just said, like, do we worship power, and what power am I chasing? Which is really good, because then you take this long cable. They actually didn't make us hike up this mountain, which I was a little bummed about. But, like, we took a cable car, which would be our version of, like, a lift, like some kind of lift up the mountain or whatever. And so, like, on the whole way back, we just started thinking about it. Like, you know, we just had time to process, like, what our power is.
Yeah. All right, so then we went to Smyrna, which was, what page, 117? So, yeah. Then we went to Smyrna next, which was a lot like Philadelphia. It was a ancient city, and then there was a modern city built right on top of it. So we're right in the middle of a city as we're
legit in the
as
middle
we're going
of
to
just
Smyrna.
A real city, and talking about all the things in the middle of a wheel. It was like, now it's like in context. Is that's confusing?
No.
But it's like we were reading it, and then we were there, but then it was in the middle of, like, a real city. So then there were all these people, most of them with Muslim, you know, traditions, listening to us and hearing us talk about the word. And it was
really definitely
crazy.
Interesting, because people would just stop and listen as we were talking and
you
discussing.
You kind of hear, like, oh, it is Americans, and then
and so it was really, really interesting. Smyrna, like I said, is a not as big of a city as Pergamum was, but, like, they kind of competed with each other for to kind of be the first and, like, to be the best in these things. Smyrna often said that they were the first, like, kind of like missionary, like, Roman city, like first outpost, and they wanted to be the best Roman city. And so it was a big deal to them to be first, to have power, to be, you know, really, really important. And so we talked through that a lot about what the church went through in Smyrna. And one of the things that stood out to me that was incredible was the testimony of, like, Polycarp, which Polycarp, like 150 AD, became the bishop of Smyrna. He's a disciple of John, like the John that wrote Revelation, right? And he's actually he's killed here in Smyrna, but he's the last, like, physical connection to one of the 12, right? He was probably the last living guy that had been discipled by one of Jesus's 12 disciples, which makes him, I think, really, really important. But he's ultimately killed here in Smyrna, and the way he dies, he's brought into the arena, and, like, they threaten to like burn him, they threaten to feed him to the beast and all of these things, and he literally just says, bring on the fire, bring on the beast, I'll never deny Jesus. And, like, what a testimony. And it says, if church history tells us that, like, Polycarp, like, the herald from the stadium announces 3 times, Polycarp has claimed that he is Christian, that he is Christian, that he is Christian, and he will not deny his God. And like that gets proclaimed to the whole city, and then ultimately Polycarp has died. But like, so Tommy left us with this one big thought. He said, "We may never die a martyr's death, but we are all called to live a martyr's life." And he said, if he's first and last of everything, then we can trust him with everything in between. What a great thought. I thought of like just a testimony of, hey, you know, we may never die a martyr's death. You know, we have it pretty good back home, but like we're all called to live a martyr's life, which essentially just means like, oh man, like we lay it all down for Jesus and he gets it all. And like we gladly do it, which is and we say, just like Polycarp, we say, bring it on, we'll take it on, whatever it looks like. Anything else from Smyrna that you stood out to you?
No, that was good. That was great recap.
that was a faster recap. We're getting faster. All right, guys, we'll catch up with you for day 7, where we'll actually step boots on the ground in Ephesus for the first time. All right, see you guys soon.